Hello and welcome to If History is Any Guide, the political and current affairs program on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. I'm Alex Rondinan. Welcome to the program. Today, I will be talking to you about some of the problems within New Atheism, the political movement and ideology which primarily exists as an online political subculture within YouTube, Facebook, and other online social media platforms. Now, to be very clear, I am not going to be speaking about atheism, secularism, or agnosticism in the lower case, the more general sense of those terms. Those are categorical terms used to define and classify particular religious or non-religious statuses, which is not what I'm interested in talking about. Atheism, with a small a, is just simply the rejection of the belief in a god or gods, the rejection of the belief in the supernatural, and the rejection of the belief in the spiritual and the metaphysical. That very basic and bare bones definition covers a vast number of people across a vast number of different contexts and settings, going from Theodore Herzl to Paul Kelly, from Fred Hollows to Woody Allen. Instead, I am speaking directly about capital N New, capital A atheism as a political idea and entity, and those will be the criteria against which I will criticize and judge it. I am choosing to use the term New Atheism because it doesn't have the same politically loaded meaning and misleading symbolism as, for example, militant atheism or atheist fundamentalism. This movement needs to be judged on what it actually does and says, not through straw men, leaving begged questions, or ad hominem insults. This movement is large, popular, and old enough that it doesn't require introducing, so I will not be bothering to provide a basic introduction to where this movement came from, what its major ideas and claims are, all the major figures within it, and so on. That kind of information can be found by anyone by doing a simple Google search. Suffice it to say that I will be talking about the ideas of Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Bill Maher, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and Michael Onfray. Their body of work has created a small but passionate network of followers who have created scores of blogs, YouTube channels, and Facebook groups. There is now a reasonably large new atheist industry afoot across the online world. It should be noted that there has already been a split within the atheist community so-called online, with those with the most progressive humanistic politics ending their association with the likes of Dawkins and Maher, while those with far less admirable political positions have continued to support them. So there is no shortage of those people who originally admired Dawkins and Maher for their deployment of atheistic rationality and criticism, who still strongly identify as atheists with a small a, but have shirked in disgust from the new atheists because of the various examples of their narrow-mindedness, crudeness, ignorance, insensitivity, and downright racism and sexism. Despite having produced massive amounts of literature on the very topic of their supposed expertise, the New Atheists have never been able to develop their criticism of religion beyond the most rudimentary and crude of polemics. This fact can go on top of everything else that's wrong with them as a political current, including but not limited to being elitist, intellectual snobbish, all-round brutish, academic amateurs, and uncultured trolls. New atheist ideas are so simple and uncomplicated that books upon books of their works can be summarized within just a few sentences. They argue factual knowledge is limited to the realm of empirical scientific inquiry, religion is based on faith, which is about believing in something without having any evidence for it, all religious phenomena and claims should be subjected to scientific inquiry and treated according to whether or not it can be empirically empirically verified as true, all religious grand concepts, such as the existence of God, should be rejected entirely because of the perpetual absence of any evidence to prove their truthful existence of such. Religious and theological doctrines are mostly collections of illogical, irrational, and factually inaccurate ideas, and so, for human society to progress to a more enlightened age of reason and science, we must reject religion outright and henceforth embrace rationality. We'll create a world of intellectual purism where falsities are rejected while truths are welcomed and adored. These statements above certainly aren't the product of a great intellect, nor are they the result of a complicated and long scholarly inquiry into the depths and reaches of human thought. It certainly wouldn't take a man of incredible mental aptitude and application to come up with these conclusions. Instead, they are nothing more than simplistic and banal observations of common sense from the experience of everyday life. It's the kind of material that your average high school student could come up with by themselves, and express in a more elegant, clear, and nuanced manner, I might add. None of this should be surprising, for the new atheists use a mechanical and rigid theory to analyze and understand the world. It involves an unhealthy obsession with rationality and a straitjacket form of logical application. When you have such a pathetic, unsophisticated, and inelegant theoretical framework to go by, it's totally unavoidable that you will create prognoses that are immature, paper-thin, and overly simplistic. In philosophical circles, this is called empiricism, and it has a long tradition. While new atheists might present their ideas in a way that makes them seem groundbreaking and rule-changing, these are in fact just cut-and-paste, rehash jobs of very old ideas. In fact, at some occasions, we could almost accuse the new atheists of plain old plagiarism. Thankfully, we don't have to rely on new atheist literature to engage in an investigation into religion, theology, and spirituality, for there are better works out there, deeper in analysis, more thoughtful in contemplation, and better written literarily speaking. In fact, if we want to explore these ideas in a genuine, fulfilling, mature, and serious manner, then it's essentially mandatory that we ignore the new atheists' books and focus our full attention on these alternative selections. One of the first problems when trying to study and discuss new atheism is actually trying to figure out what it is, and further to that, what its overall worldview is, and what changes to the world it would like to see. So if we want to properly study this movement and judge it accordingly, we need to nail down some concrete details and facts. In my introduction, I referred to new atheism as a political ideology, which is actually rather misleading because it doesn't behave the same way that other ideologies do. For you see, political ideologies have to have an internally consistent and internally logical, paradigmatic view about humanity, economics, ethics, and politics. In particular, with regards to the nature of the state and the nature of civil society and the relationship between the two. By this definition, we can classify liberalism, classic conservatism, neoconservatism, Marxism, Stalinism, fascism, and libertarianism as all valid political ideologies because they follow this criteria. Once you know a political ideology's worldview, you can then derive from it certain theoretical claims about how society will behave and operate, which can then be scientifically tested against experience. A political ideology that makes generally verifiable hypotheses can be considered more reliable and justifiable. A political ideology that makes generally verifiable hypotheses can be considered more reliable and justifiable, and one that keeps getting its hypotheses disproven far less so. So what does new atheism actually believe in? Well, it holds that the greatest task of humanity has been to properly understand its nature so that it may organize itself and take actions in its best interest to survive and prosper. This drive has given birth to logic, rationality, and the scientific method. Every area of natural life, from rocks and soil soil, plants and animals, the sky and the stars, the elemental makeup of matter, human thinking and emotions, etc., etc., can all be studied and understood through these tools of logic, rationality, and the scientific method. Human civilization has all been about finding a way to organize society and act upon nature so that humanity can prosper, including improving health, lowering mortality rate, lowering suffering, etc., etc. But along the way, humanity has picked up various forms of perverting or inverting the world, seeing it in a totally wrong way, so that rather than properly understanding its nature, humanity creates absurd, immaterial, irrational claims, and these will often become codified into doctrines that get passed on from one generation to the next, trapping large numbers of people into believing this nonsense. It's only through abandoning these irrational views and coming back to a rational and scientific approach of the world will humans finally be able to fully understand themselves. New atheism is therefore about firstly criticizing religion as the dominant forms of irrationality, and secondly promoting a rational materialistic approach to studying humanity and nature. Over the course of the last 500 years, with the Renaissance, the Scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution, this battle between rationality and irrationality seems to have been largely won. The objective, logical, rational way of understanding the world has become the dominant global system of thought. However, at the same time, organized religion, theological irrationalism, and religious fundamentalism continue to play a significant, if but minor, role in society, threatening to drag the human race back into the darkness of religious dogmatism and obscurantism. Whatever else can be said about it, New Atheism certainly does have an internally consistent and internally logical view of society, and to that extent, it can be classified as a political ideology. But here's the problem. This view of humanity, coming from New Atheism, which has just been summarized above, is not actually unique or unusual or special or innovative. Actually, most of its core features and dynamics, including separating the world into two camps or spheres or realms, one being the rational civilized and the other being the irrational barbarism, which have an antithetical binary relationship to one another, and including the progress narrative that says that humanity is generally on an upwards trajectory towards realizing pure civility, but the threat of tripping up and falling backwards is an ever-present danger and fear, can actually be found in another, much older political ideology, that of classical liberalism. So, New Atheism, in terms of its philosophical claims and beliefs and ideas, is actually little else than liberalism, just with a particularly strident, anti-religious, pro-secularism tint or emphasis. So we have to ask the question, does New Atheism actually have anything unique or special or interesting to say about humanity, society, and the world, which hasn't already been said much better and much clearer and much stronger than classical liberalism? And also, in what sense can New Atheism be classified as its own unique and separate political ideology if 95% of its content is plagiarized from another source? And that's all the time we have for today. You've been listening to If History is Any Guide, the political and current affairs program on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. I'm Alex Rondinan. Until next time, goodbye.